Welcome to Anaphylaxis UK's Let's Talk About Allergies podcast, where we provide expert answers to common questions about allergies and anaphylaxis. Our goal is to offer valuable insights on how we can all work together to help make life easier and safer for those living with allergies. Today's episode marks an important milestone as we look back on our partnership with the University of Surrey, supported by Innovate UK, focusing on tackling allergy-related anxiety. Over the past 12 months, we've heard from individuals and families navigating not just the physical side of allergies, but the anxiety, fear, and daily emotional challenges that can come with them. In response, this project has evolved to include new peer support groups and the development of evidence-based resources designed specifically for allergy-related anxiety. Joining us in this Let's Talk About Allergies episode is clinical psychologist James Dyer and Professor Chrissie Jones of Clinical Health Psychology of the University of Surrey. They'll talk to us about the research behind this project and give a glimpse into the next phase of the project, including accessible CBT-informed resources to support allergy-related anxiety across the UK. We'll also be joined by our Group Support Coordinator, Vanessa Millward, and Sam Phillips, East Yorkshire Support Group Facilitator, who will be sharing insights into the development of peer support groups designed to provide safe, understanding spaces for people affected by allergies. Firstly, let's speak to James and Chrissie at the University of Surrey. James, you joined the team a few months ago. Can you tell us more about your role and what drew you to this project?
Hey, yeah, thank you. Thanks for having us. I appreciate talking to us today. My role is, I guess my role's got two titles to it. So I'm a practitioner psychologist. So that's kind of like my trade, if you like. But my role with the university and with the charity is KTP Associate, which is Knowledge Transfer Partnership Associate. So that basically means that I'm the sort of go-between between the university and the charity in terms of running and managing the project. So that's one of my hats, and the other hat is being a psychologist. So that's kind of what I've done for the last sort of 15 years or so in some sort of capacity, worked in mental health, and recently qualified as a clinical psychologist. And for those wondering, listening, clinical psychologist, practitioner psychologist, there are subtle differences between the two. It just depends on what your job actually is. So in terms of this, I'll be a practitioner psychologist, but it's essentially the same thing. What drew me to the project? My final year of training, I had a couple of physical health placements, which aren't hugely common in clinical psychology, especially for sort of placements and things like this, because you typically get sort of your more emotional mental health side of things. And I was working in a service dealing with functional neurological disorders, which is, this is not the podcast for it, but essentially it's just when parts of your body, like with pain or fatigue, these alarm systems that kind of let you know you're tired or you're in pain, they don't switch off, which can cause like chronic pain. And there can be a psychological component to that. So I was working with that in that team. And that kind of switched me on to working and being interested in physical health and health psychology. So then when I saw the opportunity to work with Anaphylaxis UK in quite a unique project and quite an underrepresented area being allergies in the mental health sort of world, I thought it'd be really interesting and play a lot of my strengths. And I think part of what I really enjoyed about the physical, working with sort of physical health and psychology, is there's so much nuance that you don't really see when you're working just with, when I say just, like in quotes, mental health. Lots of other things that you need to consider. And I think that's especially true with allergies. There's quite unique and nuanced emotional, psychological difficulties that come along with that. So it represents a bit of an interesting challenge and something that I felt quite passionate about, especially the more I sort of read into it and everything. So that was what drew me to the project initially.
Thank you, James. Chrissie, can you explain the research behind the project and why it's important to focus specifically on allergy-related anxiety?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. And again, thanks from my side as well for having James and I on to speak to you about this project. So I guess one of the kind of main things we know around food allergy is that it does cause quite significant impairment in health-related quality of life and mental health difficulties such as anxiety. And I think probably there are several factors that we need to think about and that are kind of prominent as to why we see this. And I mean, James has just kind of spoken to you about other physical health conditions. I think one of the challenges with food allergy is that most the outcomes really depend on the patient's own behaviour and environment, rather than just relying on taking some medicine to make them feel better kind of before symptoms worsen. It's kind of the other way around with food allergy. And I guess because of that, the kind of main treatment or main management is to actually avoid the known allergen triggers. Now, that might sound simple in theory, but unfortunately, we can't control all of our environments. You know, we can be exposed to food multiple times a day, obviously when we're eating, when we're socializing, when we're traveling. And that kind of constant state of vigilance can be incredibly cognitively draining and really need us to continue to risk assess all of the time. There's a huge degree of uncertainty as well for individuals. We know things like previous anaphylaxis doesn't necessarily predict future severity of anaphylaxis. We can't always be confident about the food that we're eating. So all of these types of things really do kind of lead into health-related, food allergy-related, specifically anxiety. So we see the kind of difficulties for people living with food allergy and why this might lead to anxiety. And I think one of the challenges that we know is we've just finished a very large survey. So we had about over 3,000 adults and carers report about psychological distress over 20 countries. So this was a real global survey. And actually we found over 2/3 of the adults and carers reported either for themselves or their children psychological distress related to food allergy, but less than 20% of adults and around 15% of children or parents actually were assessed for food allergy related anxiety or psychological distress. So what we see then is this quite high need and quite low screening and support, and that really kind of I guess motivates me to kind of develop with people like James and others psychological interventions which are accessible, because we know it's a bit of a postcode lottery in the UK as to whether you have a psychologist, practitioner psychologist working in an allergy service, whether you're even under a specialist allergy service to begin with. So that's what really kind of motivates me in the kind of research behind this particular project.
Thank you. James, since joining, what are some of the main insights that you've gained, and how are they helping to shape the project?
Yeah, so I suppose some of the main insights that I've had are just around sort of how, I suppose, unique each person's perspective is who has allergies, and each person's sort of experience of allergies is going to be really, really different. And I think so. There's kind of like two approaches to this question. One is that I recognise that I don't have allergies myself, and nor do I really know many people that do have allergies until incredibly recently. Kind of almost as soon as I got the job, I met somebody who has allergies, and speak with them really regularly about it. And I think you sort of realize just how much of my experience is not having allergies. You just don't sort of factor things in. There are things that people with allergies are going to think about that I'm not necessarily thinking about. So that was a big sort of like learning curve initially, is sort of managing that, especially in the context of me being sort of running this project and making sure that the tools which we will be creating are going to actually be helpful for people with allergies. And with that, sort of learning that each person's individual journey with allergies is going to be hugely different towards other people as well. So that was a big sort of like learning curve, and it gave me a really big insight into actually how how different people are who have allergies. And one of the things that me as a psychologist I noticed is that normally when I work with people with any sort of anxiety, is that there's kind of a really unadaptive component to that anxiety, that it's like ultimately the anxiety isn't really keeping you safe. It does in this kind of like a really unhelpful sense. Like if you're really terrified of dogs and you're worried that a dog's going to get you, well, staying inside your house is going to protect you from all dogs, unless one can jump in through the window or has a key. Do you know what I mean? But like otherwise, you're very unlikely to come across a dog. But we can recognize how unhelpful that is because, well, you're not really going to have a good time if you limit yourself to just being in your house the whole time. So when, as a psychologist, you look at that and you go, okay, well, there's a really clear way of sort of working through that. You know, generally speaking, most dogs aren't actually too dangerous. And if they are, we can manage it, blah, blah, blah. Whereas that's really different when you're working with allergy-related anxiety, because small things can be really dangerous, i.e. like allergens and things are really dangerous to people. So there's a real adaptiveness to the anxiety, which is really important to not neglect. Like as a psychologist coming into this, to not neglect, actually, there are things and strategies that people do that are really important and useful. So how do we sort of work with allergy-related anxiety in a way that doesn't neglect that, but still increases people's quality of life? So that's the sort of primary insight I think I've gone so far, and is a big sort of a reflection, an important reflection that I come back to with each step of the project.
Thank you. Chrissie, which aspect of the research highlighted the need for support groups, and how did the support groups complement the development of the resources?
Thanks. That's a great question. So actually, in terms of the support groups, that probably dates back to my PhD, which was finished in 2012, where actually part of the evidence that my PhD generated was around self-care behaviours in children and young people with food allergy related anaphylaxis. And actually what we showed in my PhD was that if you're a member of a support group or some kind of third sector charity organisation like Anaphylaxis UK, you actually had a threefold better kind of self-care behaviours than those people who weren't engaging with support groups. So I think there's a protective factor there in terms of perhaps it's thinking about self-efficacy. So actually, if you're engaging with a support group or an online charity such as Anaphylaxis UK, you're getting quite helpful advice. There is a bit of a community there. And really, when we think about how it complements CBT, well, when we have the KTP itself came from a project that I did with some trainee clinical psychologists. So those clinical psychologists did very brief online group workshops with adults with food allergy, parents of children with food allergy, and children with food allergy themselves, 3 separate projects. And we have published it, and I can share the link to that article if people are interested. And actually, we see this quite routinely when we do CBT-based group interventions, that whilst people enjoy and take home the messages around the tools that they learn and the kind of methods and approaches for managing some of their anxiety, often when you speak to people after engaging with these types of intervention, they will say they loved being in that group environment, the peer-to-peer support and the kind of group dynamics. And really that kind of underpinned why we thought the support groups would be complementary to a CBT workshop. I think the other thing is, not everyone is going to engage with a psychological intervention. It isn't for everyone, but speaking to other people and learning from other people who are going through similar experiences can really help validate your feelings and help normalize some of those sensations. And you also get practical tips and hints from others who have gone through a similar situation. So I think for multiple reasons, the support groups not only complement, but may also offer an alternative approach for some people who may be more resistant to more formal psychological support, I guess.
James, I know you've also mentioned CBT resources. How do these help manage anxiety in the context of allergies?
So I suppose CBT, so CBT is cognitive behavioural therapy. Just sort of naming that just in case it's helpful. And the way that I can speak to the way it would help with anxieties first, and then in the context of allergy-related anxiety, that may be most useful. So the way cognitive behavioural therapy approaches will work with anxieties generally is that it recognises there's a cycle between our thoughts, our emotions, our behaviours, and our physiology. So let's say, for instance, if I was really scared of spiders, I see a spider, I think to myself, oh God, there's a spider, it's going to crawl on me, it's going to do whatever. What do I notice in my body physiologically? My heart rate goes up, I start getting clammy hands, I start sweating. How do I feel? Scared, panic, blah, 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 all of these sorts of things. And how do I behave? Well, I may run away, or I may try and do something about the spider. Depending on how scared I am, I may go and sort of stay at fight or flight, where I sort of, my adrenaline really sort of spikes and it feels like life and death, even though it isn't. So that's kind of like the way that a CBT formulation, so a psychological understanding of an anxiety, would work in the context of sort of a spider. A very similar thing will happen then with allergies, but it's going to be much broader, I suppose, and much more nuanced in terms of the way that I've given a very sort of like straightforward example because it's easy to then understand it. But I suppose you can have that exact same cycle happen with allergies in various different ways. So let's say, for instance, you're at work and someone's offered to bring in a cake, and let's say, for instance, you have brought your own cake that you know is free of your allergens, but then you notice that someone may have cut that cake with the cake that's shared for the office. You may not know that, but obviously the thoughts, the physiology, your behaviors, all of these things are going to respond in a way that's almost like ringing alarm bells, because that's what anxiety does. That's its job. It lets us know there's something scary. Depending on the behavior that you do, really sort of dictates the trajectory of that anxiety ultimately. So let's say, for instance, if that was to happen, your first instinct may be, well, the safest option is just sort of avoid. I won't have the cake, or I won't go to a restaurant where there could be an allergy, or I won't go to a party, or any of these sorts of things. So we can see how anxiety is doing a really good job of keeping us safe, but at a detriment to one's quality of life is the way that we kind of see it. In a similar way to, if I was really scared of dogs and never went outside, that does keep me safe from dogs, but it doesn't help my overall quality of life. What's helpful with CBT and why it's a useful way of thinking about anxiety, and especially in the context of allergy-related anxiety, is that you don't need to correct the entire cycle in order to make it, and in order to challenge this anxiety. You only really need to address one of the four things, either your physiology, your thoughts, your feelings, or your behavior. The easiest one straight away is normally behavior, because it's quite direct. But you can address each of these in turn. And that's what part of our, as Chrissie mentioned earlier, with the sort of research into CBT for allergy-related anxiety, this will eventually be put into a tool that we'll be using to sort of help people with allergy-related anxiety. And that will be, some of the strategies are going to target each of these individually, each of those aspects individually.
I might also add, I think one of the really kind of unique aspects of allergy is that kind of overlap in physical symptoms between anxiety and allergy, which is really distinct from other long-term conditions. So if we think of symptoms like dizziness, stomach ache, difficulty breathing, nausea, tightness of your throat or chest, and that kind of sense of impending doom, they can actually both be physical symptoms of anxiety and allergy. And I think that makes working with people with allergies and anxiety quite difficult, because they could legitimately be anxious, but they legitimately could be having an allergic reaction. So it's really being mindful of your own physical symptoms and having a really good understanding of what they look like. And I think that's, that also adds to the complication of this particular group of individuals.
With that as well, it's not to say that when I describe that sort of cycle that there's in any way that to suggest that the anxiety isn't valid. That kind of speaks to my point earlier about like that adaptive nature of anxiety. It's like there is a very, very real reason why we're having these sort of anxious. It's not to say that people who are scared of dogs or spiders aren't valid in their anxiety either, just to say, but the dealing with allergy-related anxiety by using CBT is not to say that the anxiety, sorry, isn't important or isn't relevant. It's just how do we notice that the anxiety is there and attune to it without it dominating our life and taking over our life and allowing us to still enjoy ourselves.
James, there's already a CBT workbook for allergy anxiety, and there are more resources being developed. Can you explain what's coming next and how you hope people will use these tools in their daily lives?
Yeah, sure. So there's a few different sort of aspects to the project, but I suppose one of the main ones that's most relevant here is that we're using a lot of the existing research, most of which Chris has spoken to already, to develop a digitized cognitive behavioural therapy intervention. So that's taking the workbook that Chrissie developed and putting it into a digital platform that people will be able to access. That will be starting to be made later in the year. The reason why I'm being purposefully vague, I suppose, is because a large portion of the timeline is up to me. So I may be giving myself a larger window than is needed. But yeah, later in the year, we'll want to have that available. And I'm also being vague about exactly how that looks, because to be honest, I need more of an opportunity to talk to people with allergies. And I'm speaking to a group of experts by experience in June, to sort of get their opinion and their thoughts on what would be the best way, the best from their perspective, the best way of sort of having this intervention. I've also done sort of research into what makes a good digital intervention, and I'm currently looking into what platforms are available that we'd be able to house that on. So that's what people can expect later on from the project.
And okay. I think just to add to that as well, the idea of that is that this is guided by people such as Anaphylaxis UK helpline staff, with perhaps adjuncts and modules for patients to organise themselves too. So they'd be signposted to particular activities rather than something that is entirely online, self-directed. So we still keep that kind of facilitated angle within the digitised tool.
And Chrissie, what is the plan for the next 12 months of this project and more long term?
Yeah, so I think James has really done an excellent job at kind of setting the scene for the next 12 months. And, him engaging with experts by experience and lived experience advice is going to be really integral, as well as those kind of what we call non-specialist health workers, so people such as the Anaphylaxis UK helpline staff, to think about how they might use this tool, and how comfortable and what training they're going to need, that sort of thing. So that's definitely going to be factored into the next kind of 12 months of the project. I think in terms of longer term, we're trying to think about perhaps other types of psychological interventions that might be useful. So we have talked a lot about cognitive behavioural therapy. We know that is a kind of gold standard for treating anxiety, but it doesn't suit everyone. So are there other approaches that might be better? We also know from evidence that we have got fair to middling evidence for kind of what we might call mild to moderate anxiety related to food allergy. But what about those people who are more severe or experiencing more kind of trauma-based symptoms? So we'll have a think about how we can progress projects around that type of thing. And then also thinking about other psychological comorbidity research. So at the moment, we're having a look to see actually if disordered eating, for example, is more prevalent in people with food allergy. So watch this space. We're always trying to think and represent the kind of experiences of people living with allergies and their families, so we can best able to support them moving forward, especially given the kind of, as I was talking about earlier, the postcode lottery when it comes to psychological support and provision, because we know the need is high and the offer is pretty low at the moment.
Thank you. The last question I've got is sort of a more general question to both of you. How do you hope this work will influence how allergy care is approached more broadly? I'll ask Chrissie first.
Great question. I think, this is the start of a kind of longer piece of work. And, it's hoped that if we create a tool which can be used by those working with people with food allergies, so we start with Anaphylaxis UK, but actually if we show that this works and can be implemented, a fairly cost-effective level and show some kind of benefit like we saw in our previous research, actually, is there a way that we could perhaps help healthcare professionals who are working in food allergy services to be able to train up and use a digitized tool in their own services, not requiring a clinical psychologist, that sort of thing. So that's kind of the model. So this kind of low intensity, which might improve accessibility for healthcare professionals and their patients. That's kind of how I'm seeing it. And I think more broadly than that, and James might want to speak about it, is this kind of psychologically informed environment that we're trying to create as part of Anaphylaxis UK and really underpins the whole kind of ethos of the project. I'll hand over to James.
Yeah, I can speak more to that. So yeah, echoing everything that Chrissie says, I think that the influence it will hopefully have is that it addresses currently underrepresented area of the population in terms of mental health, right? The kind of overarching theme of the project, the main aim of the project I'll be doing is implementing what's called a psychologically informed environment within the charity. There are various different psychologically informed environments across most like third sector places, well, not most third sector, but most psychologically poor environments are third sector, particularly like homelessness charities. And it's a relatively sort of new concept, but essentially what it boils down to is that each aspect of the organisation, and in which case this would be Anaphylaxis UK, is this addressing somebody's sort of psychological and emotional need? Are we keeping in mind sort of how the person may be affected by X, Y, Z with it? And that can start with, say, for instance, the environment within which the charity is located. Say, for instance, is the website accessible? Is it psychologically informed? The decision making, policies, are all of these things informed in a way that is keeping the people that we're here to serve, i.e. people with severe allergies, is it keeping in mind their psychological need as a priority? And the digital tool is one of the ways in which we're implementing a psychologically informed environment. That's one of the sort of vehicles of change, I suppose, that we're addressing. Another one which Vanessa and Sam would have spoken to is the support groups. So having these as available to address another sort of need. So that's what the projects will be looking at doing. And the hope with that is that by sort of implementing this, we're creating a kind of culture which is completely different to what's seen elsewhere in the sort of allergy community currently. Where even in the limited time that I've been with the charity, a lot of the stories I hear will be similar in terms of not necessarily being taken seriously or not given as much information as you would need. Like, this is not a psychologically informed way of working. People shouldn't be hearing the news of being diagnosed with an allergy, for instance, and being left to their own devices with this like perpetually terrifying thing. So the idea is that by implementing a psychologically informed environment, we are creating almost like a culture of how we can accommodate, care for, look after these people with serious allergies.
Thank you very much. Thank you both of you for being on to talk about this. Sounds like there's been a lot of progress made since we last talked about it last year, and there's lots to look forward to coming up. So thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you as well. Appreciate it.
Okay. Now to move on to the actual support groups, which are already being rolled out and have had several meetups to date. Let's find out a little bit more from Vanessa, who is coordinating all of these groups, and Sam, one of our incredible dedicated volunteers who has put herself forward to host these groups in Cottingham, East Yorkshire. Hi, and thank you for taking part, both of you.
Hi, thanks for having us.
Hi, thank you for having us.
We'll start with Vanessa first. Vanessa, can you describe your role in the support groups and how you've approached creating safe, supportive spaces for the participants?
Yeah, of course. So my role is all about supporting our volunteer facilitators and the groups that they run. I manage things like recruiting volunteers, organising their training and supporting them day to day. I also assist on our helpline as well when things get really busy. In terms of creating safe spaces, we've put a lot of thought into that. So there's the kind of practical side of things, making sure venues are accessible, clean and safe, and have all the necessary insurance and safety processes in place. But it's also really about the people as well. So we take great care to ensure that we hire the right volunteers to facilitate support. They're all incredibly kind and dedicated, and they go through a full onboarding process with checks, and they do training in things like safeguarding and managing group dynamics. They all have lived experience too, which really helps people feel understood. And ultimately, that's what we want, spaces where people feel comfortable, supported, and not alone.
And Sam, what motivated you to actually become a volunteer as a group facilitator? And can you share a little bit about how your own experience with serious allergies has influenced this?
Yeah, first of all, I just want to say thank you for having me on the podcast. For a while, I've been wanting to do something positive and really help people living with serious allergies. Last year, I went to the Allergy and Free From show in London and visited the Anaphylaxis UK stand, and that's when I first came across the group facilitator role. And straight away I thought, wow, this sounds absolutely fantastic, and I just can't wait to get involved. I just love the idea of running a support group where you could bring people together affected by serious allergies, share experiences and tips, and help support one another. Both of my daughters have got serious food allergies and carry adrenaline pens. Jessica's 9 and allergic to milk. Georgia's 5 and allergic to eggs and certain tree nuts. And more recently, my husband actually had a severe allergic reaction, and now he carries adrenaline pens too. So I've got lots of experience of living with allergies, and I just know how stressful and lonely it can be.
Thank you. Vanessa, what kind of, you did already mention training, but is there specific training and guidance you give to the support group leaders?
Yeah, so we make sure our volunteers feel really prepared before they start running a group. So they go through a mix of online and live training, and they get a handbook and resources they can refer back to whenever they need. But I think the biggest thing is that they know they're not doing it on their own. They've got support from myself, from James and the wider team, and we check in with them regularly. We also give them space to debrief after their groups as well, which is really important, especially if anything difficult comes up that they'd like to discuss and just talk through. And we try to create that sense of community between volunteers as well, so they can learn from each other and feel part of something bigger. They're given the opportunity to connect with other volunteer facilitators, and they're invited to join us at charity events too.
And Sam, from your perspective of receiving this support from the charity, how has that helped you run your groups?
Yeah, the support has been absolutely amazing. Vanessa is fab. She's such a warm, friendly and positive person, and I always know she's there if I need anything. The charity provided lots of training and guidance, so you feel fully prepared to run your sessions. And I do love the regular check-ins with Vanessa and James, so you never feel like you're doing it on your own. But it's also been lovely to get to know the other volunteers too. So we regularly meet online, and we even have our own WhatsApp group. So it's lovely to feel connected to others who are doing the same role. Must have been one of my highlights from last year was going to the Anaphylaxis UK Business Symposium, where we could meet the other volunteers and the Anaphylaxis UK staff in person, because it's such a supportive network and everyone gives you that guide, that reassurance and confidence that you need to successfully run your group. And I'm just really proud to be part of the team at the charity.
That's really lovely to hear. Vanessa, that must be really nice for you to hear as well.
Yeah, that's so lovely. Thank you, Sam.
Vanessa, how are you ensuring, because obviously Anaphylaxis UK, we're very, one of our main aims is to make sure that everything is evidence-based and the information we're putting out is as accurate as it possibly can be. And how are you ensuring consistency and quality across these different groups?
Yeah, that's such an important question, especially when you're running multiple groups in lots of different areas. We've put clear structures in place, so there's consistency across all groups. So things like how people register, the checks that we do on venues, and the training that every volunteer will go through. So everyone's basically starting from the same place and working to the same standards. But at the same time, we don't want every group to feel exactly the same. We recognise that different groups have different needs. So, some might be more focused on open conversation, while others might bring in guest speakers, like maybe have an allergy nurse one week, or they might do other activities. But we're learning as we go, and we're thinking about how we best gather feedback so that we can keep improving and make sure that we're meeting people's needs.
Sam, has being part of this project revealed anything about allergy-related anxiety or peer support that you didn't quite expect?
Yeah, I think what really stood out for me was how quickly people opened up when they realised they weren't on their own, and how emotional people were. I think there's so much anxiety that comes living with allergies, and that people don't always see, and people have been dealing with it on their own for such a long time. So just to have that space where people could open up with other people that totally understand, it just makes such a difference. And I'm really looking forward to our next allergy support group in Cottingham as well, because it's just so important people don't go on that allergy journey alone.
Vanessa, several of the groups, like Sam just said, several of the groups have already had their first meetings and are preparing now for their next meetings. Can you give us an overview of the groups that are currently running, and what the plans are to expand to more areas?
Yeah, so it's been really exciting getting the first groups up and running. We've got 5 at the moment. So they're in East Yorkshire, Derbyshire, North London, Berkshire, and we've also got one online group as well. They've all got more sessions coming up over the next few months. We've also just brought on our second cohort of volunteers, which is great. They're all eager to get going. They're based in places like Scotland, South Wales, Hertfordshire, Lancashire, and Northern Ireland. The goal is really to make support as accessible as possible and to reach as many people as we can across the UK. And again, these groups will be a mix of online and in person.
And this is probably a question for both of you. What's the feedback that you've been receiving from participants so far? What impact are these groups having? I'll probably start with Vanessa.
Okay, yep. Well, it's still early days. We only launched our support groups in January, but the feedback so far has been really positive. People have said they found the groups helpful and engaging, and we've seen people sign up to attend more sessions, which is always a really good sign. And actually, some people who have attended have actually gone on to apply to become volunteers themselves as well, which is amazing to see. So it's exciting to see the groups grow and expand.
Thank you, Vanessa. Sam, have you received any feedback, or what's the kind of general feel from the groups after they've taken place?
Yeah, I think already the support groups are having such a positive impact. I know at the end of my last session, everyone was that busy chatting, they didn't even want to go home. So I think that speaks volumes. Also, I think it's fantastic that many people who came to my last group have signed up for the next session. So it really shows the value people are getting from the groups.
Thank you so much, Sam. Vanessa, how, if people listen to this and they want to get involved or join a support group, what should they do?
The best place to start is our website, where all the details can be found about upcoming groups. And we also share updates on social media as well. So if anyone would like to join a group, they can sign up either through Eventbrite, or they could email us as well at supportgroup@anaphylaxis.org.uk. We'll also be running further recruitment drives later in the year too. So if anyone's interested in becoming a volunteer facilitator themselves, they can keep an eye on our socials, where we'll post all the details of upcoming vacancies.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, both of you, for coming on and explaining more about the support groups. And Sam, I wish you lots of luck for your next support group as well. So thank you.
No, thank you, Megan.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me too.
We hope you've enjoyed today's podcast. To make sure you don't miss any future episodes, you can subscribe via your favourite podcast app, including Spotify, Apple Music and YouTube. Finally, remember to follow us on social media at Anaphylaxis UK and join in the conversation. Anaphylaxis UK is a registered UK charity supporting people with serious allergies. Head to www.anaphylaxis.org.uk for more.